Coming to you from the Windy City. Welcome to Let's Talk Shop, a podcast about all things cloud and enterprise tech. Listen to insights and guest interviews with IT thought leaders and professionals. Now, here's your host, Elias Khnaser.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Let's Talk Shop. Today, I have a special guest, a fellow researcher, and someone who is truly an expert at the edge. We're going to unpack the edge. We're going to unpack AI. We're going to have a lot of fun today. It is my great pleasure and honor to welcome Maribel Lopez, the founder of Lopez Research and principal, I almost said architect, principal analyst. Welcome, Maribel.
Hey, good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. It's always fun to chat with you. Last time we chatted, we were on the Equinix Digital Leaders Summit. That was cool also. So I want to start with the edge with you. So I talked to a lot of people. Everyone's talking about the edge. There's a million different definitions for edge, and I'll get to kind of maybe defining what the edge is and what you're seeing. But primarily, what I think people would be mostly interested in is what's really happening at the edge? What is the actual use case that is actually happening at the edge?
Okay, I mean, I think you don't do the edge for just the sake of doing the edge, right? Really what people are talking about now when they mean edge computing is they're talking about processing data closer to where it happens. And they want to do that for a lot of reasons. One, they might need to keep the data in a certain place due to data sovereignty, privacy concerns. Two, they might not want to spend the money to send the data to the cloud, have it come back. Three, they might not have the time in terms of the application to do that. Something might need to be decisioned in near real time, so they want to have it close to the edge. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about. And then four, there's a lot of volume going on in terms of people have connected sensors, they've connected lots of different equipment. So now they're saying, okay, it just makes more sense to figure out what's going on locally in that environment and then take whatever data we need back to a cloud or, really think about the difference between real-time processing, near real-time, and more batch processing. So that's what I think is happening at the edge, really.
So if it's processed at the edge, then there's got to be analytics and some form of AI or ML that's also happening at the edge to make sense of this data. Is that also... Are there investments going into these technologies?
Yeah, if we look at the difference between, say, 2021 and 22 versus, say, 2020 and before that, like all we spoke about, we're talking about first machine to machine and then IoT, and a lot of that was about the connection. Can we get some kind of sensor on it, or can we get some wireless connectivity to it, or how much is that going to be, right? So those past couple of decades were all about connecting. Does it speak the right protocol? Can it speak SCADA? Whatever it was, right? I think what happened in 2021 and 2022 is we kind of hit critical mass where there was enough wireless connectivity, there is enough cheap enough that you could do it, right? We started to send people home. People couldn't go in and do things they needed to do. So all that remote monitoring and maintenance started to make more sense. Like things happen, right? So now in 2022, we're talking a lot about how do you push analytics out to the edge is sort of the first thing, right? Which is just, basic garden variety analytics. Then I think the next wave of that is we start talking about machine learning and other more AI related sort of model processing on device or at the edge or near the edge, those kinds of things. But right now, I think we're in the base more than connection. Let's see if we can do something with the things we've connected. We've got all this data happening. Okay, great. Data in of itself isn't that interesting. We have to do something with it, right? We've got to analyze it, got to make some action on it.
So speaking of data, and you bring up an excellent point. Whenever I think about the amount of data that's coming from the edge, I'm always thinking, is it still worth storing this data? I mean, is it even relevant after the data is processed, after I get the insights? Is it worth storing it, investing in storage backend, whether that's on premises or in the cloud? Or is the idea to process the data, get actionable insights in real time, and then discard the data?
So, I mean, some of it depends on the data, obviously. But what I would say in general is one of the reasons that you're processing at the edge is let's just say something really basic, like a temperature sensor. It might say 85 degrees over and over and over again when you're pinging it, right? Do you really need to take the same ping of 85 degrees over and over again and send it back to the cloud and store it in the cloud? No. What you want to do is you want to take the information that says, over a 24-hour period, 62% of the time it was 85 degrees. Done. Right? That's your average or whatever. It's usually some subset of that makes sense, right? Where it gets a little different, and you might want to think about keeping all of it, is sometimes in security related things. So when security vendors are trying to figure out what happened in an incident that, some bad actor managed to infiltrate you, then you're looking back at data to try to figure out, well, what was the signature of that? What happened? Could we predict it? That kind of thing. So that's a different way of thinking about data. But I think for most organizations and most of the data that they're looking at the edge, not all of it is going to need to go back into a cloud or even stay on their premise because it's just not relevant. So.
It's not relevant. So is it fair to say that the data that we want to keep or the data that we want to store is the data that we want to use to potentially train an algorithm or maybe train machine learning for that matter? Or is it still, again, it really depends. Sometimes there is sensitive data that we just want to store for an extended period of time for regulatory reasons, maybe.
This one's hard, right? Because every company has a different use case. But one of the characteristics you might want to look at is what's the likelihood you're going to need to use that data at some later time? Like, for example, if you were a telecom service provider and Maribel is having issues with her network, that should be logged somewhere so that when I call in, 3 months from now with some other thing that I want to talk to you about, you have an understanding. It's part of my history that I had issues with the network in the past or that I spoke with somebody in the past. So, and that network data is edge data, right? It's things that happen out in the world. So sometimes that's very valuable. It could be you have a self-driving car and, you're trying to figure out the routes of a self-driving car over time. Is there, you might say, okay, that particular stop sign doesn't seem to be working well for all the self-driving cars that have gone by it over a course of 3 years, right? So some data makes sense to keep forever, but not necessarily all data.
And then the $1 million question, because you gave some fantastic examples, especially the self-driving car. Maybe it can improve the way somebody is driving, somebody is parking, conditions on the road, what stop signs or any signs are working, which ones are not. But the question then becomes, how do you parse through the data and determine which one you keep and which one you don't? It almost feels like it requires a very rigorous data classification and strategy. And if it's that rigorous and time consuming, then my question is it worth doing? Or do we kind of revert back to the default of we're just going to store it? It's easier.
I think most people are doing store it, it's easier, but I don't actually think that's a long-standing viable strategy. So what I think happens is that you have some very crude categorizations, which is just the way we talked about securing files in an organization. Remember, there was a time where we were going to tag every file with like how secure it needed to be. And there were going to be all these permissions that were around it. And I think where people basically settled out was we either don't care so much about it, it's fine, or it has to be locked down. And it was very binary, it was an A or B kind of thing. And I think that for some organizations, they will definitely say, for this category of data, we probably always need it. If you're in pharmaceuticals, you're always going to need like lab test data that happen in different areas, right? Maybe that's not an edge computing case, but you get what I'm getting at.
Sure.
So, but in other cases, I can see how, I'll give you a good use case. Sometimes data just becomes irrelevant. I was talking to the woman that does Formula E, and they have different cars every 4 years. So, the previous car's data is irrelevant at that point, because you're not using that car anymore. That data is useless, right? So I think in organizational speak, there's actually data that is useless. And this was something that came to bear when we started looking at pricing models for air travel during COVID. Well, the whole pattern of who was traveling, how they were traveling, when they were traveling, all changed, right? So we needed something different. So there there are events, for example, you might have a lot of records of something that's happening in different logistical conditions that become irrelevant at some later date. You now have, or inadvertently, like maybe you're doing cold supply chain on drugs now. That's an edge use case. Like, is that drug arriving? Was that COVID vaccine arriving at the right temperature? Do they need to keep that forever? Probably not, right?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So let me see if I can pivot a little bit. So far, the edge use cases that we've been discussing feel like they're revolving all around sensor data, IoT. Is there another relevant edge use case that you're seeing, or has it consolidated truly to the IoT use case?
I think that those are like, if you ask what people are doing with edge today, that's sort of the easiest, most obvious low-hanging fruit. But there are other type of edge use cases that are based on location. So for example, if I walk into a certain store with a mobile application, that store will know that I'm in the store, and that's data that they're collecting at the edge. They might even know the path I've taken through the store, depending on how that goes. There are public safety, yes, but even garden variety video analytics that a lot of different buildings have set up video collection. So that's, I guess we could say video camera is a sensor, but I don't necessarily think of it quite as a sensor. But sometimes it's a person that's moving around. Sometimes it's a sensor. We're seeing robotic applications and warehouses that are happening. But sometimes I'm a person in the field wanting to have access to a piece of information. Like, I'm standing in front of you and we're talking and you want to know something, and I've got to figure that out in real time. And sometimes that is a combination of data that has to be pulled together. Maybe it's something from SAP and something from FedEx and something from an Excel spreadsheet that you had that all has to be mixed, mastered, and sent to your application on your smartphone or tablet, right? That's the edge. We don't think of it that way, but that is the edge.
So going back to the old Citrix model, the Citrix model was always the edge, I guess. We just didn't know it, or we didn't call it the edge at the time. But it's kind of what you're describing.
Everything old is new again, right? We just have better technology to make it work.
That's right. So you mentioned walking into a shop, and one of the use cases that fascinates me is augmented reality and being able to potentially advertise to people at the physical location that they're in. So it's very similar to cookies with browser, where I dare you to search for anything, and then you're going to see all of these ads about what you just searched for. Could we see, or are you seeing, or is that still in the future, augmented reality or targeted advertising when you walk into a store like that? Do you foresee that?
I think that's happening in big ways and small ways. So it sort of depends. But one thing that can happen is you can walk in a store with maybe a Walmart or a Target app, and they could actually suggest things to you knowing that you're in the store. And those things would be more targeted than the average ad because they have some sense of what you bought in the past. Usually if you're a loyalty member, they know kind of what you bought in the past.
Order history.
Yeah. And based on the order history, it could be, hey, you need to, here's a coupon for toothpaste, right? So that stuff is happening today. What you're talking about with the more immersive style of advertising and edge computing can happen, but it's more that there has to be a reason to happen. So we've talked about in the past, it could be grilling season and you walk into a big box store and you're standing in front of the grill and you don't know the difference in the grill. That's a really good augmented reality use case where you can, put your phone up and videos can pop up and other things can happen.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can get a better sense without needing to speak to somebody that's probably not standing around at the grills waiting for you to show up, right? So another, more of a sensor one, admittedly, but people are talking about walking into a store. You've got like the magic mirrors in the dressing room, and it knows what you've brought into the dressing room, and you can then hit a button, and somebody can come bring you a different size, right? So that's another example. When you start looking at AR and VR in the field, I think that there's some really interesting use cases with remote assist. So many corporations we speak to are having labor shortage issues, and they don't have the skill in the labor force that they had in the past. So they have somebody back at the headquarters that's actually walking somebody through, say, a dishwasher repair or an elevator repair, or how to start or start something, stop or start something. So those are things that you can do with either fully immersive glasses, or more likely, a lot of people talk about just doing it with a smartphone and a tablet and holding it up to a piece of equipment and seeing where things are supposed to be and what you're supposed to move, or having the person on the other end see what you see and be able to guide you through certain things. All that's edge, right?
How far away do you think we are from this being mainstream? Like, is it happening, but happening in very niche, with very niche companies, or is it truly happening? Like, everyone's trying to do this.
I don't think everyone's trying to do it because I don't think it works for everything.
Okay.
So I think this gets back to, and maybe this has been our problem all along, so the question is, do I want to experience the world this way? Well, in Pokemon Go, I did, right? So, and that was happening in a big way. So we could claim that it already happened, but it only happened for individuals in a certain application at a certain time, right? So that's all they wanted. Would they do that all day, every day? Maybe not, right? Is it happening in organizations that need to do remote training or remote assist? Yes. So it's really based on use case, because right now it still feels a little clunky. And you're still not exactly sure how it's going to work. I mean, I've sat at home and I've tried to place the sofa in my living room to see if I liked it or not. And it was okay. It wasn't great, but it was okay. It was better than me waiting to see if it fit through the door. but so maybe the answer to your question is we're mostly not there.
So do you think we're like a couple of years, 2, 3 years, 5 years?
I think we're a few years away. And let me tell you why I think there's a few years. Some of the technology that we'd need ubiquitously available, it's not that it doesn't exist. It's just it's not everywhere all the time. So does everybody have the latest and greatest smartphone? Does everybody have the best PC? These are things, you need something with a GPU or a VPU, right? There's all these XPUs that we're talking about. And there's actually, frankly, been a shortage of some of those as well. So depending on where we are in the cycle, I think you don't experience certain things until there's a real critical mass. Like if you go back to the days of mobile, at some point when you had enough people that had an application-capable smartphone, bam, the app ecosystem just went crazy, right? Right now in augmented reality, as an example, you're probably holding up a gizmo. You just don't have enough critical mass people that have immersive glasses or even, AR glasses. It just doesn't exist in the field.
I agree. I tend to agree. And I love the remote assist use case. I think it has a lot of application across industry. That's one example that can go across industry, whether it's healthcare or, technical support for a PC or helping you install equipment in a warehouse. I mean, it has a lot of good applications, but I agree with you until the technology becomes a little more mainstream, maybe a company like an Apple or a Google, when they're a little more affordable, a little more practical to use, I don't think they will take off. But that brings us to another thing. You mentioned Pokemon, you mentioned augmented reality, you mentioned the glasses. This was coming.
Oh no, it's the word. I know what you're gonna say. You're gonna say the
Metaverse. I'm gonna say here in Chicago, we don't use the S word for that white stuff. Yeah. I'm gonna use the M word with you. We're talking about the edge. So is the metaverse BS? Is it really BS? Or do you feel like every technology goes through a maturity phase, and maybe the phase that we're in, there's a lot of hype around the metaverse, but it will settle on something that will be useful? I mean, NVIDIA is talking about Omniverse, there's a lot of different variations of metaverse, but do you feel like there's a practical application?
Um, I do, but mostly the way people talk about it, it's not that, right? So I'm embarrassed to say that I remember when there was Second Life, and the idea was we were all going to go live in a virtual universe and go to virtual work and do virtual whatever.
Like Real Player One, the movie.
Yeah, exactly. And now like you fast forward, and I just feel like it's a different generation of people saying that my little avatar is going to walk up and shake hands with your little avatar, and we're really going to be into that. So I don't think that version of the metaverse is going to happen anytime soon. Having said that, I think tremendous work is being done to try to bridge a physical and virtual gap. Because right now, we're here. This is good. But I think the feeling is that moving forward, if we think about how collaboration is going to be done, that this isn't good enough, right? It's not close enough to being
Not immersive enough.
Yeah. So I do believe that we are pushing towards trying to find a way to be immersive. And then the question in my mind becomes, well, when do you need to be immersive, and how immersive do you need to be? And when you need to be immersive, if you're a gamer, is like today, it's now. You're doing it. You're spending the extra money, you're dealing with some of the clunkiness of it, but it's an option for you. Is it a full-on metaverse? Everything is there? No, but it's what it has is pretty darn good for you. And I think that's been some of the disconnect between when you saw some of the original things that Meta was talking about, where we saw sort of the metaverse selfie of Zuckerberg, and everybody's like, well, that looks really terrible, because we're used to gaming, which looks really amazing, right? So you're like, but that doesn't look anything like the cool gaming thing. Like if we had that cool gaming style metaverse, then oh yeah. So I think that there's that disconnect, and I think the Meta's point was, well, we don't need to be there to get started. And I do appreciate that. So what I look at is exactly what you were talking about, which is the omniverse discussion, right? Or the way Microsoft talked about it with HoloLens, where there are use cases where we're doing collaboration, where we're doing design, where this type of technology makes sense, and we're going to push for it. It's got a business use case. It can really do some interesting things. Simulations in general are used in a lot of different fields now. So I do think that there's some applicability to metaverse, but I'm still not down with I'm going to show up at the virtual conference and my virtual thing is going to talk to your virtual thing. And no, actually tried some of it, and I was like, oh God,
I don't want it.
I don't want it. I don't want it. And then I started to think of like all the permutations of like, as an individual, it's hard enough for me to have figured out who Maribel was to begin with, but now I have to figure out who Maribel's going to be in a metaverse.
Virtual Maribel.
Oh dear goodness, it's like, well, am I going to be me, or am I going to be somebody else? Is everybody going to be them, or are they going to be somebody else? It's too complicated. So I'm going to go back to edge computing. That's
Before we go back to edge computing, I'm a big fan of NVIDIA in general. So keep me honest here. And I've seen some of the stuff that they've done on Omniverse, and I can't help but be impressed with the fact that the simulation is being built as the application, like as the need requires. So there's a lot of ML, there's a lot of AI that is building the environment in real time.
Yeah.
Again, do you feel like that is realistic? Also, is that the wave of the future? Is that things are going to be, let's call it unpredictable, where they're being built in real time, as opposed to kind of we're setting the framework for where you can do things?
This kind of harkens back to what we were talking about a minute ago. There's a trade-off between cost and availability and performance that we're still kind of working through for this. So I look at this and say, yeah, if I could like strike up at the right cost, infinite compute to do a real-time anything that sort of adapted to the world, that is super cool, right? And it is it is possible that we could do that. But then the question one has to ask themselves is, at what cost today?
Yeah. So speaking of cost, we've talked about a lot of technology. A lot of cool things are happening at the edge, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be things at the edge that we haven't even thought about, or things that will come out of things that we're working on. But I can't help but think, with this type of technology, it feels like small businesses are going to be squeezed significantly. So the access to this technology, is it going to be limited to the large businesses that have the ability to put a strategy forward to give their customers the right experience? How does a small business compete? Like, for example, let's take Whole Foods, that's now owned by Amazon. How does a small supermarket chain that owns 6 or 7 supermarkets compete with a Whole Foods in the future?
So I think you're bringing up a really interesting point. And in some ways, as a small business myself, I'm extremely optimistic about the power of technology to improve my business, right? I'm smaller, I'm more agile because I can go out and leverage similar technology to the big guys and gals, right? So in that case, I feel like technology can be a real game changer and unifier and leveling the playing field. Where it gets strange is where you have to mix the physical and the digital. So it doesn't have the same proportion. Like, my business is largely digital, right? So I create content, I go out and meet with people. It's an advisory service. So the advisory part isn't as scalable as everything else, but a lot of what I can do, I'm basically on StreamYard with you right now, right? So these types of things would have had to have gone to a studio back in the day. So I'm really excited about the power of technology from that side. When I say where it gets weird is, you gave me a grocery store example, right? So a grocery store can have an amazing online presence. It can have all of their operations run in cloud services as their back end and their front end. What they can't get is the same cost of food as Whole Foods does, because they're buying less of it. And that's just surely a volume game. So technology will help, but not to the same degree. So this is the thing that's really interesting about sort of the riff and the force of, who can take advantage of what. But even those businesses that are highly dependent on physical goods can still get some upside with technology. And that's a great thing for everybody.
Yeah. My concern with those is, again, it's the differentiator is also going to be those immersive experiences that we've been talking about. And for technology to trickle down to those small businesses, I feel like it takes time. Like, again, websites today, it's kind of a given, it's default, right? You open a business, the first thing you do is you create a website. But back in the day, websites were also limited to those larger companies that could hire a developer that could, write HTML or whatever.
Absolutely. I see where you're going with it.
Yeah. So I'm worried about, can I walk into a Fresh Farms or a Tony's Foods here in my area? I won't get the same immersive experience that I would get walking into a Whole Foods, where I can walk in, pick up anything I want and walk out. I may or may not need a wallet, for example.
Yeah.
Those are the things that I'm concerned that will technology kind of give them such a big advantage that the small guy won't have time to catch up. Like, yes, the technology will trickle down, but will they have time to catch up?
So it's interesting that you bring that up, because, and this is sort of the way the world order works in some ways. If we go all the way back since the dawn of time, there are big companies and small companies. Having said that, you need the big companies to go there first to figure out, to prove in the business value, to figure out how to do it, to have the deep pockets to do it early, right? And this is what we're seeing now. The people with the big pockets are doing it early. It is an extraordinary amount of money to create a virtual conference in a metaverse on a per room basis, right? Somebody else that's got deep pockets is going to have to figure that out before Maribel can show up 3 years later to do a virtual conference, right?
That's fair.
So the point is noted that, the question you're really getting at is, will they have such a lead that the experiences that come after are just wah, wah, not that interesting, right? So I think they'll have a significant lead. I will say I feel like it moves faster than it did before. Like, I feel if you come up with a good idea, 6 to 12 months later, somebody can like roll up a service that does that, right? So the large leaders in the market have to move even faster than they had in the past because they don't get to keep their lead as long. It used to be there were significant barriers to entry, but now there's still they still have the lead, but other company, they worry just as much about some other large company who also has pockets figuring it out and doing it the same, doing it better than they do. So it's a really dynamic environment. What I worry about most for the small businesses is that who are they going to turn to help them figure out what they're supposed to do? Because they don't have that technology expertise in-house and it's extremely difficult to hire. So they're going to have to find somebody else to help bootstrap them on that. And that's not easy, right? It's not easy to figure out who does that. It's not even easy to figure out what you need. So that I think is one of the biggest challenges for them, is like even knowing what to do.
I agree wholeheartedly. So we're coming up on time, but I need to squeeze in a couple of more questions. So you hinted a little bit towards clouds and moving stuff back to the cloud, and the role that cloud plays in this edge environment. Of the cloud providers, let's call it the three hyperscalers: AWS, Azure, Google. Who do you feel is really investing, is really putting a best foot forward in terms of empowering the edge? Is it AWS? Is it Azure? Is it Google? Are they equal ground?
Okay, I'm going to answer the question.
We're going to piss someone off.
We're going to kick somebody off the island. I still think that AWS is leading because they were far in advance, and so they've had more time to think about the edge than the others have. What I will say, and they've even come up with like helping organizations with private 5G services and other things that they're pretty detailed on, right? I think the others are following fast, and they have interesting offerings. What I think is difficult about the cloud providers and the edge is it's sort of like saying, hey, you can have the edge, but have it our way. Whereas if you inverted the discussion, the customer wants to have it their way and leverage a cloud provider. And this is why you see companies like HPE and Dell starting to offer the everything as a service cloud stuff to people that are like, oh, I need a little bit of this and I need a little bit of that, and I want to manage it the way I want to manage it. You're seeing VMware come in with multi-cloud to kind of help people have an edge strategy that could be using any cloud, right? So I think we're seeing that even those that are ahead, people are saying, I want more flexibility. I want different ways to do it.
So are you saying what I think you're saying? So for a while there, and I still think it's still the case, I feel like some of the traditional companies, some of the names that you mentioned, kind of had lost their way, didn't know what their position is in this new world. The clouds were dominating so much. Do you feel like those traditional data center vendors, let's call them, without naming anyone in particular, can find their footing in the edge? Is that how they're going to balance things out with the clouds? Is this edge play?
Yes, because the edge can be defined in a couple of different ways, right? The edge can be defined as the edge of your premises. It could be defined as the MEC in sort of telco speak. So like it could be the closest data center. It could be the company's data center, or it could be a device in someone's hand, right? So there's different variations of the edge. So what they have to convince people is that, hey, they've got a reasonable play in the edge and they can do it in this spot or that spot. Basically the spots that aren't the cloud, the spots that aren't the central cloud, they can play in. And their play is to say, hey, you want to have more flexibility, you want to have it in a way that the way you want it. We can help you get closer to that. Now, there's a management cost to everything, right?
Sure.
Because now you've got traditional cloud and you've got hybrid cloud, which really means you have multi-cloud, right? So we've multied on top of that, right? So what we have now is a very complicated mishmash of different clouds. But the reality of the situation is technology is messy. Nobody wants to put all their eggs in one basket. And this is why we are where we are. And that hasn't changed since the dawn of me following tech. So it seems
Probably won't change until we retire either.
no, not expecting it to. People are people. We still make the same mistakes with different technology names around them. So
I agree. What haven't we talked about? What is there that's going on at the edge that maybe I didn't ask you, or that didn't come up, or maybe something that you think is coming that would be interesting for our listeners, our viewers to know about?
Yeah, there's like one thing I think is really interesting. And this is where you're talking about data and analytics and AI. And everybody knows garbage in, garbage out. So that's like easy. What I think we are forgetting is that because we've heard so much about AI, sometimes we think AI is in a place that's more advanced than it is. And one of the mistakes I see a lot of organizations making is not ensuring that their AI is functioning the way that they'd want it to. So there's a lot of set it and forget it kind of mentality going on here. You got to keep up with the models. And even if you're not the person building and designing the models, you have to kind of touch base and say, does this make sense? Does this pass a sniff test? Is this what we should be doing? Because you're making real hard business decisions on, data that may have been spit out from algorithms and a model. So you got to be confident that it appears to be going in the right direction. And if it is, it can actually measure volumes of data that you would never be able to measure and give you more interesting outcomes. But you have to make sure that it's going in the right direction before you can trust it.
Maribel, the conversation with you is awesome. For those that would like to interact with you, maybe work with you, can you tell us a little bit about the types of services that you offer?
Sure. So we offer basically technology advisory services. So you want to figure out what kind of technology you should be purchasing, or you want to try to help people understand what technology you have and how it works and why it would make sense for companies. I also do market education videos and podcasts myself. I've got 3 podcasts now. It's a little scary. So a little too much time there, but there's a lot of different things that we provide, but a lot of people come to us to help people understand technology. So that's what I would say my business largely does. You can find me at Maribel Lopez on Twitter to have a discussion there. I see that you already have your handle. And you can also find me on LinkedIn at Maribel Lopez as well. So although there are many Maribel Lopez's, so that's one of
I will make sure to put all of your contact information in the description of this episode with links to Twitter and LinkedIn and all of the social medias that are out there for folks that are interested in contacting you. In closing, I can talk with you for hours on end. Conversation is always fun, always enjoyable. Thank you so much for making time for us today and for sharing your insights. And we'll look forward to seeing you again, maybe another 6 months, 7 months, when we've got a little bit more of an update. Maybe we could do this again.
All right. Thanks, Eli. Looking forward to seeing you.
Take care now.
Cheers.